The wedding had been the kind of event people in her town would talk about for months. It was held in a hall filled with white roses, soft golden lights, and music that made the atmosphere feel like a dream. She walked down the aisle, in a gown that shimmered with every step, while her husband stood waiting with a smile so bright it seemed he had been waiting for this moment all his life. Their vows were heartfelt, promises of love and loyalty that brought tears to the eyes of family and friends. It was the perfect beginning, the kind of day that seemed untouchable by sorrow or doubt. Yet even as she said the words, a small part of her heart whispered a different name, one she had tried to bury but had never truly forgotten. Her husband was everything people thought she needed: steady, dependable, and utterly devoted. He had a good job, a warm smile, and a reputation as a man who treated others with respect. Everyone admired him, and they envied her for finding someone so stable in a world where loyalty often seemed rare. She told herself over and over that she was lucky, that she had finally escaped the uncertainty and pain of her past relationships. She believed that marriage would be the fresh start she had been craving, a new chapter where old scars no longer mattered. On the surface, she looked every bit the happy bride, but in her mind, images of another man still surfaced uninvited, reminding her of unfinished emotions she wished she could erase. The truth was that she had never fully let go of the man who had once held her heart. He had been her first love, her greatest weakness, and her deepest wound. Their relationship had ended badly, leaving her shattered, but the memories of their passion still lived inside her. She thought marrying someone else would erase those feelings, that stability would be enough to silence the chaos inside her. But even as her husband kissed her forehead and whispered how lucky he was, she felt the shadow of her past moving closer, reminding her that sometimes the heart refuses to forget what the mind wants to bury. The wedding had been perfect, but perfection can be fragile, and cracks had already begun to form, cracks that no one else could see but her. It happened quietly, without warning, like a storm forming on the horizon that no one notices until it is too late. Just 2 weeks after the wedding, when the excitement of newly married life was still fresh, she received a message that made her heart stop. The name glowing on her phone screen was one she had promised herself she would never see again. One she had avoided even whispering since the day she walked away. It was her ex, the man who had once consumed her life and left her broken in ways she thought she would never recover from. The message was simple, almost casual, but it carried the weight of all the years they had shared. He asked how she was doing, as if he had every right to know. At first, she stared at the words without responding, her hands trembling slightly. She knew she should delete it, block the number, and forget it ever appeared. That was what a loyal wife would do. Yet something inside her, a reckless mix of curiosity and longing, convinced her to reply. It began innocently, polite exchanges about life, work, and the changes that had happened since they last spoke. But beneath the small talk was an invisible thread pulling her back toward him, tightening with each message, her chest filled with the same nervous energy she had once felt when they first met. Every day she told herself she was in control, that nothing was wrong with catching up. Her husband worked long hours, and when he was home she played the role of the perfect wife flawlessly. She laughed at his jokes, cooked dinner and planned their future together, all while hiding a secret conversation that grew more dangerous with every passing hour. She began waiting for her ex's messages, her heart racing each time the phone vibrated. The sound of his name lighting up her screen gave her a rush she had not felt in years. It was intoxicating, almost addictive. Soon, the tone of their conversations shifted. He reminded her of their past, the wild nights, the stolen moments, the way she had once looked at him with fire in her eyes. He painted their memories in colors so vivid that she almost forgot why it had ended. He told her he had changed, that he understood her better now, that he regretted letting her go. She wanted to resist, but his words filled the empty spaces inside her heart that her new life could not reach. With every message, the lines between loyalty and desire blurred until they were nearly invisible. She knew the danger of meeting him, but when he suggested seeing her again, she didn't say no. The thought of being in the same room with him made her pulse quicken and her breath shallow. She told herself it would only be once, just to satisfy her curiosity, just to close a chapter she had never properly ended. But deep down, she understood the truth. One meeting would never be enough. What she was stepping into was not closure. It was the beginning of a secret that had the power to destroy the very life she had just built. And still, she chose to answer his call. They met at a quiet cafe far from her neighborhood, a place where familiar eyes would never wander. The moment she saw him sitting there, waiting with the same confident posture she remembered, her chest tightened. Years had passed since their last encounter, but the spark that had once burned between them reignited instantly. His smile was dangerous, almost knowing, and when she sat across from him, it felt as though time had folded back on itself. The conversation flowed easily, too easily, and what should have been awkward after so much silence instead felt natural, as if they had never left each other. One meeting turned into another. They justified it with excuses, catching up, reliving memories, talking about the lives they now led. But beneath the surface of every word was something unspoken, something heavier and hungrier. Each encounter grew longer, more intimate, until the line between past and present blurred into a fog that neither of them wanted to escape. She knew she was crossing boundaries, but she couldn't stop. The thrill of the secret was like a drug, intoxicating and reckless. She told herself her husband would never find out, that what he didn't know couldn't hurt him. It was during one of these meetings that everything tipped into dangerous territory. They no longer met only in public spaces. A hotel room became their refuge, a place where reality was locked outside and the past was allowed to come alive again. Each time she stepped into that room, she left behind her wedding vows, her promises, and the trust of the man waiting at home. The betrayal grew deeper, more deliberate, but her guilt was drowned out by the rush of forbidden passion. What she didn't realize was that the world is rarely as private as people think. The cafe cameras, the hotel bookings, even the faint traces of perfume and messages left on her phone, all of it left marks, evidence waiting to be uncovered. In the digital age, secrets are never as safe as they seem. Her ex knew how dangerous it was, but he thrived on the risk, encouraging her recklessness. For him, it was a game, a way to prove he still had power over her heart. For her, it was a dangerous balancing act, one that could collapse at any moment. Every night she returned home, slipping back into her role as a devoted wife. She convinced herself she was still in control. She smiled, she cooked, she planned her future with her husband, while living a double life that contradicted everything she pretended to be. She believed she could have both, the stability of marriage and the fire of her past love. But what she didn't know was that the walls of her secret world were already closing in, and soon the cost of her choices would be higher than she could ever imagine. Her husband had always trusted her. In the early days of their marriage, he never questioned where she went, who she spoke to, or why she sometimes seemed distracted. He believed in her completely, which made the first signs of change all the more unsettling. It started small, with unanswered calls during the day, and vague explanations that did not match her usual openness. She would return home later than expected, her cheeks flushed, and her excuses quick, rehearsed almost as if they had been practiced. At first he dismissed it as adjustment to married life, telling himself she was just busy, that nothing serious was wrong, but the unease inside him refused to fade. One night when she fell asleep with her phone in her hand, he noticed the screen light up with a message that she quickly swiped away. He did not want to invade her privacy, but the seed of doubt was already planted. From that moment, every late return, every guarded expression, and every sudden smile at a text pushed him closer to suspicion. Instead of confronting her, he decided to wait and watch. He wanted the truth, but he wanted it on his terms. The first piece of undeniable evidence came when he checked their shared bank account and saw charges that made no sense. Hotel bookings, restaurant bills in parts of the city she never mentioned visiting, and small but unusual expenses began to appear. His chest tightened as he went through them one by one, realizing they formed a pattern too clear to ignore. He tried to convince himself there might be an explanation, but deep down, he already knew what it meant. His next discovery was even more painful. While she was in the shower, her phone buzzed repeatedly. Against his better judgment, he picked it up. What he found silenced him with shock: photos, messages, and words that cut deeper than any blade. Her ex's name was there, bold and undeniable, attached to conversations filled with passion and longing. She had not only betrayed him, but done so without fear, leaving behind a trail of evidence that proved how deeply she was entangled. His hands trembled as he scrolled, but his mind grew calm, eerily calm, as though something inside him had hardened. Instead of confronting her immediately, he closed the phone and placed it back exactly where she had left it. He did not want her to know what he had seen, not yet. He chose silence as his weapon, a mask of normalcy that hid the storm raging inside him. He greeted her with a smile, kissed her forehead, and asked about her day as if nothing had changed. But every word she spoke became part of a puzzle he was assembling, every lie she told fitting neatly into the picture he already knew to be true. At night, when she slept peacefully beside him, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every moment of their short marriage. The wedding, the promises, the laughter, all of it now felt poisoned. Yet instead of collapsing under the weight of betrayal, he began to plan. He would not lash out in anger or beg for explanations. He would bide his time, collect every piece of evidence, and let her believe she was safe. His silence was not weakness. It was the first step in a plan she would never see coming. He became a master of pretending. Every morning he kissed her goodbye before work, his expression warm and steady, hiding the knowledge he carried deep inside. She believed she had fooled him, that her late arrivals and sudden errands went unnoticed. In reality, he was already 2 steps ahead, carefully building a case without revealing his hand. The silence was deliberate, a trap designed to make her careless, to let her think she was safe enough to slip further into her lies. He started by memorizing her routine. When she left home claiming to meet friends, he followed discreetly, never close enough to be caught, but near enough to see the truth for himself. The first time he saw her step into a hotel lobby, his chest constricted, but his face betrayed nothing. He watched from a distance, recorded the time, the place, the details. Each outing became another piece of evidence, a thread in the web he was weaving around her. By the time she returned home, carrying excuses and false smiles, he already had proof tucked safely away. Technology became his silent ally. He installed discreet tracking software on her phone, hidden so well she never suspected. Every message she exchanged with her ex, every location she visited, appeared before his eyes. He didn't confront her even when the evidence became overwhelming. Instead, he stored it, cataloged it, and replayed it in his mind until he knew the entire shape of her betrayal. The more he discovered, the calmer he became, as though detachment had replaced heartbreak. His silence was no longer about pain, it was about power. For her, life carried on as usual. She felt daring, reckless, convinced she was untouchable. The thrill of her secret blinded her to the subtle changes in her husband's behavior. She never noticed how his questions grew sharper, how he began to test her with stories and half-truths to see if she would lie again. Each time she stumbled over her words, he smiled quietly, adding another mark against her in his mental record. She thought his patience was love, when in reality it was calculation. Her guilt occasionally flickered through the cracks. There were nights when she looked at him sleeping beside her and wondered if he suspected, but when he woke with a gentle smile and treated her with kindness, she convinced herself she was safe. She mistook his silence for ignorance, never realizing it was a blade slowly being sharpened in the dark. Meanwhile, he rehearsed scenarios in his mind, how he would reveal what he knew, what he would do when the time was right. He imagined her face when she realized how deeply he had trapped her, how long he had been watching while she thought she was in control. The power shifted silently, and she didn't even notice. She believed she was living two lives, but in truth, every move she made was under his quiet surveillance. The trap was set, and though she still thought of herself as free, she was already caught. She just hadn't realized it yet. The weight of her secret eventually became too heavy to carry. At first, she had managed to bury the guilt beneath excitement and adrenaline, convincing herself that what her husband didn't know could never hurt him. But as days turned into weeks, the contrast between her two lives became unbearable. On one side was the devoted husband, who looked at her as though she were the only person in the world. On the other was the dangerous thrill of her ex, a fire she knew she should have extinguished but could not resist. The pull between them tore at her conscience until sleepless nights and anxious days began to eat away at her. She started imagining what might happen if the truth slipped out. What if her husband noticed the changes in her behavior, the inconsistencies in her stories? What if someone saw her with her ex and told him? The fear of exposure gnawed at her, but instead of forcing her to stop, it only made her reckless. She told herself that confessing might be her only way to find peace. If she admitted what she had done, maybe he would forgive her. Maybe the man who loved her so completely would be willing to give her another chance. It was a fragile hope, but it was the only thing that kept her from drowning in shame. One evening, while the two of them sat together in the living room, she decided she couldn't hold it in anymore. Her hands shook as she spoke, her voice unsteady, her heart racing. She expected shock, anger, maybe even tears. She braced herself for him to shout, to demand answers, to threaten to leave. But none of that came. Instead, his face remained calm, his expression unreadable. He simply listened, nodding, occasionally, his eyes locked on her as if he were studying every word. When she finished, silence filled the room. It was not the silence of confusion or heartbreak, but something colder, sharper. Then he spoke in a low, controlled voice that sent a shiver down her spine. He told her he already knew. He said it plainly, without hesitation, as though it were a fact he had lived with for a long time. She froze, her mouth dry, realizing that the secret she thought she had been carrying alone had been known to him all along. The calmness in his tone was more terrifying than anger could ever have been. She would have preferred shouting, accusations, even threats. But instead, he spoke with chilling steadiness, telling her that betrayal always has a price. His words lingered in the air, heavy and cryptic, leaving her unsure of what he meant. Did he plan to leave her? Was this the end of their marriage, or did he have something else in mind, something she could not yet see? That night, she could not sleep. She lay awake beside him, her heart pounding with fear. He had not yelled, he had not packed his bags, and he had not demanded explanations. Instead, he had chosen silence once again. But this silence was different. It was the silence of a man who held power, of someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She realized too late that by confessing, she had not relieved her guilt. She had handed him the upper hand completely. As the hours turned into a full day, her fear grew sharper. He did not return home that evening. His phone remained unreachable. She checked with his workplace, but they told her he had not shown up. Confusion spread into dread. Had he left her completely? On the second night, as she sat alone in the darkened apartment, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Her pulse spiked when she opened it. The text contained a line she recognized instantly, a private message she had once sent to her ex, a promise of love that should have remained buried. Reading her own words staring back at her made her skin crawl. She quickly typed a response, asking who it was, but no reply came. The silence returned, more suffocating than before. The next day, another message arrived. This time it was a screenshot of a hotel booking she had made under her name. The date and time were clear, undeniable evidence of her betrayal. Her throat tightened as she realized someone had access to things she thought were hidden. She called the number frantically, but it rang and then disconnected. Whoever it was, they didn't want to talk. They wanted to torment her. Over the following days, the texts kept coming. Fragments of her past conversations, details of her meetings, even photographs she didn't know existed began appearing. She wondered if her ex was blackmailing her. But the tone of the messages felt different. They were not desperate or demanding. They were deliberate, calculated, almost personal. It was as if the sender knew her fears and wanted to unravel her slowly. The possibility that it was her husband haunted her. Had he staged his own disappearance to punish her? Was he watching from somewhere, pulling the strings of her unraveling sanity? Every shadow in the apartment seemed to hold his presence. Every creak of the floorboards made her wonder if he was nearby. Sleep became impossible, food tasteless, and every second filled with dread. She wanted to believe he would come back, that they could somehow mend what had been broken. But with every message, she understood more clearly. If it was him, he was no longer the man she married. He had become something far darker. The call came on a gray morning, when she was already stretched thin from nights of no sleep and days filled with fear. A police officer's voice on the other end asked her to come to a riverbank just outside the city. He said little, but his tone was enough to send her trembling. Her mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last. By the time she arrived, her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear the sound of the water rushing nearby. The scene was grim. A car, charred and broken, sat at the edge of the riverbank. Smoke still lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of burned metal. The police had cordoned off the area, and officers moved quietly, their expressions grave. She recognized the car instantly. It was his. The sight of it made her knees weaken, and she nearly collapsed. A gloved officer showed her a single object retrieved from the wreckage. A wedding ring, scorched, but unmistakable. She clutched it in her hands, her breath coming in sharp gasps, as reality closed in. The questions began immediately. Had he been inside? Where was the body? Was it an accident, or something far worse? The authorities spoke carefully, but their words gave no comfort. They told her no remains had been found. They suggested he might have been thrown from the vehicle, or that someone else had staged the fire. The uncertainty was more terrifying than a clear answer. The car was proof of something violent, but the absence of his body left a shadow over everything. In the days that followed, rumors spread quickly. Neighbors whispered about revenge, about the humiliation of a husband betrayed. Some said he had ended his life in despair. Others suggested he had planned the disappearance as punishment, leaving her to suffer in confusion. Each rumor only deepened her torment. She could not escape the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for her next move. The messages on her phone continued, even after the discovery of the car. They became sharper, crueler, echoing her own words from the past. Each message reminded her of her betrayal, twisting her own actions into weapons against her. One night, she received a final text that froze her blood. "Do you still want me back?" It was signed with his name. Her hands shook so violently she dropped the phone. She no longer knew what to believe. Was he alive, hiding somewhere in the shadows, orchestrating her unraveling with cold precision? Or had someone else taken control of the game, feeding off her guilt and fear? The absence of truth became its own kind of prison. Every corner of the apartment felt haunted by him. Every knock at the door made her flinch. She once thought she could balance love and desire, loyalty and betrayal, but the choice she made had shattered everything. Now she lived with only questions, and a dread that grew heavier with every passing day. The man she had once promised forever to was gone, but whether he was dead, vanished, or transformed into something she could no longer recognize, she did not know. What she did know was chilling. She wanted him back, but whatever he had become after discovering the truth was no longer the husband she married. It was something far more terrifying.